This is A Sustainable Mind, episode 18.
The notion of sustainability, it simply sustains what we're already doing. We have way exceeded the carrying capacity of a lot of the systems on our planet. Is this something that we just want to sustain?
Welcome to A Sustainable Mind podcast, where we delve into the minds behind today's most impactful environmental campaigns, organizations, and startups, inspiring the environmental changemakers of tomorrow. I'm your host, Marjorie Alexander. Greg Peterson is an urban farming and sustainability innovator who resides at the Urban Farm, an environmental showcase home in the heart of Phoenix, which he opens periodically for tours and classes. He also runs Urban Farm U, designed to educate and inspire others to not only grow food for themselves, but for others as well. Please welcome to the show, Greg Peterson.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So I must say that I'm incredibly excited to be interviewing you because people might not know it, but one of my dreams is to have an urban farm, not necessarily just to be a gardener, but to actually have an urban farm where I am producing for myself and my family and my friends, but also selling to the community a niche crop that is valuable to me and those around me. So I'm so excited to be interviewing you. So first of all, I want to jump in here by asking you, what was your relationship with nature and the environment growing up?
Oh, wow. So I've lived in Phoenix, Arizona for 48 years. Before that, I came from Santa Monica, California, both big cities. In fact, if you stand on top of my roof in Phoenix, Arizona, here at the Urban Farm and look, there's houses 50 miles in every direction. And I have lived within 5 miles of the Urban Farm, my home where I live, for the past 48 years. So a lot of my interactions and a lot of my connection came in the desert, because Phoenix is in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, and it came in the city. So it was, city nature, if we want to call it that. Along around 1974 or 75, we started going to a place out there, a place called Cole's Ranch. And, it was a creek and maybe 150 cabins out in the middle of the forest up on the Mogollon Rim. And so for about a decade, we'd spend a lot of weekends during the summertime going up there, and at that point I was, 9, 10, 11, 12. And my brother and I didn't really connect. So I was pretty much on my own when we got up there. So I did a lot of exploring in pine forest and along a creek. I became very good at, jumping along the rocks and so a lot of my younger connection to big nature, not city nature, was at a place called Cole's Ranch.
That's awesome. So I want to jump into your current farm and how that came to be. One thing that I noticed about your website is that you call your home, this is your home, right? You live here, is that you call it an environmental showcase home. Tell us about why you chose to call it that and what that offers to the community.
So the Urban Farm is a third of an acre, so that's roughly 80 feet wide and 160 feet deep, somewhere around 12, 13, 14,000 square feet. And as I said earlier, it's right in the middle of Phoenix. And I purchased this property in 1989 for a very specific reason. We get what's called flood irrigation. It's a water right that comes with the property because this used to be a citrus orchard in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So I purposely went out looking for a floodwater property when I went looking for a home back in 1988, 89, because what I wanted to do was to be able to grow food. So in 1989, we moved in and immediately we planted some gardens. And 2 years later, there was this flyer that ended up in my mailbox on something called permaculture. And I'm right in this moment. I'm going back 25 or so years and remembering that flyer landing in the mailbox. And I opened the mailbox. I pulled this flyer out of the mailbox, and I was in awe of what it was talking about. It was like it was talking about giving a course about something I'd been dreaming about for decades. And so I ran inside the house and I said, I was married at the time. I said, Michelle, I'm going to go do this course. You want to do it with me? Well, she went and did it with me. And we went in 1991 and discovered permaculture together. So permaculture for me, I like to call it the art and science of working with nature. And so, how do we really, it's an exploration of how we plug in and work in the flow of nature rather than working against nature.
So one thing that I'm not sure if I know the difference between horticulture, permaculture, and the agriculture that we all know very well. And maybe if I knew something about Latin, I would know, but I don't. So can you explain the difference of those to us?
Yes, I absolutely can explain the difference. Horticulture is the study of plants. Okay. Agriculture is the process of growing food. And permaculture is a contraction of two words, permanent and culture, or permanent and agriculture, permaculture. So that's where it came from. It was a concept penned, and I use that word on purpose, written down by Bill Mollison and David Holmgren. Put it together in some books. And all they did is they went looking to nature to see what kind of systems happened in nature and how we could replicate them, mimic them, and work in the flow of them as human beings. So horticulture and agriculture are really the study of plants and the study of how to grow them. And permaculture is really the overarching design system on how we can plug in and work in natural systems.
And I'm glad that you're speaking to this, because I'm actually recording this podcast right now in rush hour traffic and there are cars whizzing by, and I have for most of my life have wanted to live in the city. Now that I've been in the city for a decade, I live here in Los Angeles, and it's rough, man. I think I got to get out of here. But if we can get a raised bed or a small plot in our backyard or something like that, I think I'd be a lot more happy until I, have the opportunity to move somewhere else. So dive back into your environmental showcase home here.
I call the urban farm an environmental showcase home because it's my place to experiment. And I do a lot of experimenting here on how to live in the city, how to grow our own food, how to live in the flow of nature. So to give you an idea of what goes on here at the urban farm, I have 3 different kinds of solar panels on the roof. I have a photovoltaic, which creates electricity. Those are the solar panels that basically turn sunlight into electricity. I have a solar hot water heating system, and I have a solar hot air heating system. So it's a black box that sits on the roof, and when it gets to 110 degrees in the black box, it blows hot air into the house. So I have 3 different, and they're experiments. To be quite honest with you, experiment number 3, the black box on the roof that blows hot air, doesn't work very well. And that, a funny story, my dad, probably 10, 12 years ago when I put the thing on the roof and I was spending $2,500 on it, my dad looked at me and he said, "Greg, what happens if it doesn't work?" And I said, "Dad, well, if it doesn't work, then I have a black box on the roof that cost me $2,500. And, it works okay, but it doesn't work great." So that's one of the things I do. We do rainwater harvesting here. I do gray water harvesting. The entire landscape is edible, or it supports edible. About 82 or 83 fruit trees are on the property currently. We have chickens in the backyard. So my whole goal here is to make the urban farm a sustainable showcase home, as sustainable as possible. And a big piece of that for me is that I make sure that as much stuff that is produced here on the site stays on the site rather than goes away. So, basically the waste products of the urban farm, especially the farm waste products, the tree limbs and leaves and grass and all that kind of stuff, I keep as much of that here on the site as possible. And the reason that I call it a showcase is because I open it up periodically. Right now, it's about 4 times a year. I open it up periodically for tours. So I invite the public to come in, usually on a Friday morning, and then 2 tours on a Saturday morning to come in and actually see what I'm doing here. And I'll start I start in the front yard, and we talk about the fruit trees in the front yard and the gardens. We interestingly enough, we grow a bulk of our vegetables in the front yard.
By the way, is that legal where you are? Because here in Los Angeles, that's actually been illegal, or at least people have had warrants for their arrest because they've done that. Is that an issue where you live?
It is not.
Okay.
So remember earlier when I told you, I think it was in our pre-conversation, that I had a bachelor's and a master's degree?
Yes.
I went back to school late in life, and in 2004, I graduated with a minor in urban planning. And my master's is in urban and environmental planning. And urban planning is about city planning. And so as I was developing this concept for the showcase home in the late 90s and early, what do we call them, aughts, 2001, 2, 3, and 4, I was learning about city planning as part of my degree. So I made sure that every step along the way I was enrolling the neighbors, that I was doing what was appropriate for our neighborhood, that I was working with the city. In fact, I've had 2 mayors come to my urban farm. I've had the City of Phoenix planning department come to my urban farm. They all want to come and see it. So I purposely designed the space, again, to be a showcase for people to come and see what is possible in the city. Because I'm a strong believer that if you're going to plant something, grow it, nurture it, water it, fertilize it, it dang well better be edible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And before I diving real deep into this topic of urban farming, because I want the details. I mean, just for me personally, I love this stuff. I totally geek out on it. But I want to take a bit of a step back, because this concept, not only of the environmental showcase home, which is pretty awesome, but also the urban farm in general seems like a very sustainable project and a very sustainable business and a very sustainable way about going about your life. You're growing food for yourself, you're growing food for your community, and a lot of the waste you're turning back into the system through composting or mulching, things like that. But a little birdie told me that you have an issue with this word sustainability. And I've brought it up a couple times that I have an issue with the word green, but I've not really gotten into it a whole lot on this show so far. Tell us why you have an issue with the word sustainability and really help us understand that.
So the notion of sustainability, it simply sustains what we're already doing. And if you take a look at the notion of carrying capacity, that's the capacity for an ecosystem to handle the amount of basically waste that's in it, we have way exceeded the carrying capacity of a lot of the systems on our planet. And is this something that we just want to sustain?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it's not. I mean, this is something we want to love. I want to love the earth. I want to love the food that I'm growing for others and for myself. I don't want to just sustain it. So that's a very good point. What else?
Yeah, so I view sustainability as a stopgap between doing nothing, which was, call it actually 20, 25, 30 years ago when, Earth Day, I guess we're in our 45th year of Earth Day. So, something happened in the 70s and 80s around this to start pushing us forward. In fact, I think the word sustainable was first used in 1982. I'm going to guess maybe in a Les Brown book. I have it on my book. And so we've had this long, slow start around doing something. And about 10 or 12 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, this word sustainable became the word to use. And oh my gosh, the next thing to do is we need to do everything sustainable. Well, first of all, I don't personally believe that there is 100% sustainable. In fact, I get this a lot. People tell me, oh my gosh, you're that guy that lives in that 100% sustainable house in Phoenix. Well, I don't live in a cave. I drive a car. I eat food that's, grown in our industrial food system. And if I was going to be 100% sustainable, I wouldn't be using any of those resources. And it's almost like sustainable is this place to get to. We need to get to being sustainable. And I don't know that we're ever going to be able to get there. So sustainable for me lives in this conversation about, okay, we weren't doing anything. Then for a whole long time, we've been doing this notion of sustainable. And, to be quite honest with you, it's a way overused word, just like green is. People put that in their marketing and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, no matter how unsustainable or ungreen the product is, it makes it better because you put that word on it, right?
Or that color. I mean, just putting the color and a leaf on a package, it just flies off the shelves. It annoys the crap out of me.
Exactly. So I started studying, as I said earlier, I started studying permaculture in 1991, 92. I can't remember exactly when the date of my course was. And in permaculture, it is proposed that there is degenerative, which are assets or things that continue to degenerate, and there is regenerative, and those are those things that continue to regenerate into the future. And if you look at the systems that we human beings have put in place on the planet, every single one of them is degenerative. So in the context of what I just said, is that what we want to sustain? Do we want to continue sustaining 100% of our systems being degenerative? And how do we sustain them? It's a big, deep conversation. I'm clear about that.
Yeah, that is. I'm just sitting here kind of scratching my head thinking I could go deeper, but this conversation will be 2 hours. But that's awesome for people to really begin to understand and just, start having this conversation in their own minds and just, at the dinner table, because you're absolutely right. We don't just want to have a sustainable relationship with our planet, with our food, with our loved ones. So why would that necessarily be the word that we've chosen? And yeah, that's something to go back and study. I'm gonna look some stuff up on that, because I see myself going down a sustainable, quote unquote, sustainable rabbit hole this evening once I get home.
Nice. So here's the thing. I don't think sustainability is bad. In fact, I think sustainability is really good, because it's gotten us to a place of being able to think about and do things that are more sustainable. And in nature, if you look to nature, so we have this human system that I've defined that is degenerative. If you look at natural systems are
regenerative.
Right. That's right. Exactly. They regenerate themselves. They continue on without intervention. And if they do break down and go into degenerative, what happens to them?
They die and they get composted into everything else, I guess.
Exactly. So do you see the conundrum that we're in? Human beings, every single human system that we've ever designed, and I've been looking at this for 40 years, is degenerative. So the conundrum is that every single one of our human systems is going to break down and go away eventually. So what do we do with that? And I say what we do is we study regenerative design. We build in resiliency. Resiliency is like a rubber band. If you stretch out a rubber band and you let it go and it bounces back, build in resiliency into our cities. And, my first place to start with that is grow your own food.
Wow. Well, I tell you what, I am going to go right now and buy a regenerativemind.com and going to rebrand my entire podcast. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, there you go.
But I will be buying that URL by the end of the day. So it's taken. But so I know everybody is clamoring for us to get to the meat of the conversation. A lot of people that listen to the show live in urban environments all over the world. A lot of listeners in Australia, a lot of listeners on the Upper East Coast here in the States. So like my issue at my place is I have a little bit of outdoor space, but there's no light like at all. What are some of the challenges that you hear a lot of people mentioning to you as to why they don't start a small urban plot for themselves, either just growing stuff for themselves or, maybe their friends, and what can they really do about those challenges?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is a notion of time for people in their mind. They just don't have the time to be able to do it. I think that's the biggest one, because quite honestly, it is so easy to grow food. In fact, I tell people the easiest thing to grow and the most expensive thing to buy are herbs.
Yeah.
You can if you have a patio, you can just put a few pots of herbs out on a patio. And, even if you don't have a whole lot of light on the patio, herbs actually do quite well in not full sunlight. So most of the time, it's an issue of overcoming time and money thoughts that people have about doing it. And we live in such a fast-paced culture. People working, most people work more than 40 hours a week to sustain themselves financially. And I know that when I was working full time, I actually wasn't even working full time. I was working 34 hours a week. And just for a short time in the mid 2000s. And while I was at school, I took a part-time job, and what I noticed is how exhausted I was after coming home from a 34-hour-a-week job and then going to school. And the interesting thing for me is that, honestly, with the business that I have now, which is Urban Farm U, I work probably 60 to 70 hours a week, and I'm invigorated by it. So I'm not, for me, I've been self-employed since I was 15, so 41 years this year. And being self-employed is invigorating for me. It's it pushes me forward, and being beholden to somebody else for my time used me up. And I think that there's a lot of that goes on in our culture where people get used up by somebody else and they don't have the time for themselves. So what I propose is that by becoming an urban farmer, and here it's really simple, to be an urban farmer. Are you ready for this?
I am so ready.
Really, 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 really simple quiz. Grow food, share it.
That's it.
Because when you think about it, what do farmers do? Farmers grow food and they share it. Well, a lot of farmers sell it, but that's still sharing it, right?
Right.
Yeah. So those are the two things that I encourage people to do. Grow food and share it. Now you can be sharing it with your family and you can call yourself an urban farmer. Here's where it gets really good. There's a step number 3. And step number 3 is name your farm. It is so incredibly important to name your farm because then it builds an identity for it in the world. And you run into names like Wish We Had Acres. That's my friends Dave and Laura.
That's cool.
They have a quarter of an acre. Yeah, I know, right? Jack's Beanstalk is another farm name. Two Fat Cats Apartment Gardens. That's Melanie's farm name, my friend Melanie's farm name. And you get these farm names that they're light and they're fun. And, you all of a sudden you show up into a space and you claim yourself as an urban farmer. And, when somebody asks you what you can do, you say, well, I'm an urban farmer and my farm name is, well, in my case, it's the Urban Farm. And people know, I've been doing it here for 25 years in Phoenix, and people know the Urban Farm. And the reason people know the Urban Farm is because I branded it that way and put it out in the world for so long. And that in itself carries the local food conversation forward.
What are some of the unexpected benefits for you personally, but also for your loved ones and your friends of you having this farm in the city? What's come out of it that you did not quite expect?
A movement. So there's all those things, and we can talk about those in a minute. All the bonuses and all the value of growing your own food and doing your own farm and all that kind of stuff and plugging into nature. The unexpected thing for me, and I always wished for it, but the unexpected thing was this movement that's happened. There are thousands of named urban farms here in the Phoenix area because I've been having this conversation with people now for over 15 years. People show up in my front yard when I do tours. So remember, Environmental Showcase Home, I started doing tours of the place in 2002. And the first Saturday of every month, I would do a tour of the urban farm. I didn't do it in December and January or July and August for, too cold, too warm. So 10 months a year or 8 months a year, I was doing a tour of the urban farm. And in 2002, 2003, 2004, there were Saturdays when I would stand in my front driveway waiting with my tent set up, waiting for people to show up, and nobody would show up. Now, fast forward, 12, 14 years, I have to offer a Friday morning tour and 2 Saturday morning tours to accommodate everybody.
Unbelievable.
There is this movement, and a big piece of it is because people want to know where their food is coming from. And that's so to the other side of it, the bonuses of growing your own food. You know where the food comes from. Mm-hmm. You know what's in it because you put it there. So if you put chemicals or pesticides or anything like that in your ground, you know that it's there. By the way, I've been organic for 27 years here at the Urban Farm. You get fresher food. I'll tell you what, I cannot eat a peach that's grown and delivered to me in a grocery store. I just can't do it because when I go into my front or backyard here in about May 15th of every year, and I knock a peach and it falls off into my hand, And, you kind of squeeze it and it's the perfect ripeness. And then you take a bite into it and it splashes down your chest. It is juicy and sweet and nutrient dense, and it got picked at the peak of ripeness. One thing people don't know is that food that is picked before it is ripe doesn't have all the nutrients in it that your body needs. So if you're picking food when at its peak of ripeness and eating it, it's more nutrient dense. The other thing that people don't know is that once you pick a piece of fruit or vegetable, it immediately starts degrading. Right? So if you pick something that's not ripe yet, it's not got all the nutrients in it. And then the moment you pick it, it starts degrading it. By the time you're eating it a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month later, there's not a whole lot of nutrients left in it. And here's what I tell people. In order to sustain our life and our health, there's 3 things in our culture that cause 100% of the disease that we run into. And we have control of all 3 of them. And they can all be addressed by growing your own food. And they are lack of nutrition in our food. So if you're growing your own food, it's most nutrient dense. Environmental toxins, you have control over what you're putting in the food that you grow, and stress. Those 3 things, lack of nutrition in our food, environmental toxins, and stress, cause, I believe, 100% of the disease in our culture. And I've blown this past several PhDs and doctors, and they agree with me.
I would agree with you as well, actually. Yeah.
So if you want to be most healthy, if you want your family to be most healthy, grow your own food.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it?
It is.
And you know what's interesting, and my grandparents are 86 years old, and I don't know if they ever had a victory garden. I would imagine that they had something, because my grandmother grew up on a farm, and my grandfather was in the military. I mean, that was his whole life until he retired. So I'd have to ask. I don't know if they ever grew, my grandmother ever grew her own food, but my mom never mentioned it growing up. So maybe that didn't happen. But a lot of the excuses, my personal excuse is I spend an hour in the car both directions, and then I go to a job I don't like, and it's 8 hours, and I don't feel like I have the time to grow anything. And I'll start asking questions about how we can overcome some of those challenges in a second. But can you just talk to us a little bit about the history of agriculture, how we've gotten to now, and some of the revolutions, the grow your own food revolutions that are happening all around the world?
Absolutely. So first of all, a very impactful thing happened for me in 1992. I found a book called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. I don't know if you've heard of it, or if you've read it.
No, I haven't.
That's okay. It's a conversation between a gorilla and a man, and the gorilla's the teacher. So it's a work of fiction, or is it? And in it, Daniel Quinn frames out over how the past 10,000 years, human beings have come to be basically the dominators of the planet, and how we have dominated all species and how our food system came to be. So I just want to plant the seed for your listeners. Go read that book. You'll either love it or you'll hate it, but it's going to change your life. So that's one of the key pieces for me that kind of changed the way I look. In fact, a lot of how I speak is what I call Quinnian philosophy. Daniel Quinn wrote the books. He actually has like 14 books out. I've read them all. But the industrial food system is what you're speaking to. And interestingly enough, the industrial food system, or the green revolution, as they called it in the 60s and 70s. Interesting that we have a green revolution now that's totally different from this, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the green revolution came out of World War II when we had excess chemicals that the chemical manufacturers needed to do something with. So they figured out how to make them supercharge plants. In the case of nitrogen, they throw lots of nitrogen into plants and makes them grow really fast and makes them green. And pesticides. So fertilizers and pesticides came out of World War II. They needed to do something with them, so they figured out that they could grow food with them. What you don't see in that is, number one, chemicals are negatively impactful on our health. And number two, the food that is being grown doesn't have the micronutrients. It doesn't have all the nutrients that we need as Homo sapiens to grow. it doesn't have that anymore because the way we're growing it is with this just what are called macronutrients, which is NPK and fertilizer, NPK, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And those are the three things that will have plants grow, but it doesn't make them nutrient dense. So what our industrial food system has done, it's done a really good job of growing a lot of non-nutrient dense food. So it creates a lot of food, but not a lot of nutrients. And so that's kind of how we got to where we're at today. And, it's really cool for me because at the age of 15, I wrote a paper on how we were overfishing the oceans. This was in 1974. I knew back then that there was something wrong with how we're living on the planet and how we're eating on the planet. And so I've had this thread that's lived with me for 41 years now that I've always watched. And 25 years ago, I dove in really deep. And 18 years ago, I actually looked at how I can make my living teaching people on how to do this. And it's been a really interesting journey of discovery for me on what's in our food system and how to make it better for us. And my solution is urban farming. Grow your own.
Awesome. So speaking of urban farming, growing your own, what are some of the easiest? I mean, this is something that people are probably asking themselves, well, you mentioned herbs. What are some of the easiest vegetables? And by the way, I've been thinking about this, and you are the perfect guy to ask. I've been thinking about this for the last several months. Is there such thing as a vegetable? Because most things we consider vegetables, quote unquote, like squash and tomatoes, are actually fruit. And then when you think of other vegetables like spinach and etc., those are leafy greens. So there's no such thing as a vegetable, right?
I'm speechless. I don't know what to say to that. I hear what you're saying, and there is a lot of confusion even for me on what is a fruit and what is a vegetable. I would have a tendency to call leafy greens vegetables. I think that the distinction is, and we could look it up if we wanted to. The distinction is that things that have seeds in them are fruits, but we're just all confused about that, I think. I mean, because then what's a potato, right? There's no seeds in a potato.
Oh, right. Root vegetables. I was having a conversation with my housemates, and they're like, well, yeah, I guess the only vegetables are root vegetables. That makes sense.
Yeah, there you go.
So what are some of the easiest things, whether it's fruits, vegetables, herbs, or is it herbs? Had that conversation with my mom 2 weeks ago. Or leafy greens. What are some of the easiest things for people like me that are just getting started to grow?
Well, we mentioned one earlier, and that's herbs. Herbs are the easiest thing to grow and the most expensive thing to buy. And they add so much taste to our food and so much nutrients to our food that, grow some herbs. That's really simple. Green leafies, lettuce, spinach, kale, those kinds of things are really simple. Really, honestly, everything is really simple once you know how to grow it. And I learned how to grow things by planting them. So the first time I planted broccoli, so this was decades ago, but the first time I planted broccoli, I'd never grown broccoli. I went and got some broccoli plants and I stuck them in the ground and I watched what happened. Now, one of the easiest things for me to grow are brassicas. Brassicas are broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, those kinds of things. And we plant those here in August. So our growing season for the brassicas and the green leafies start in August. And so usually by November 1st, I'm harvesting broccoli. And I harvest I love broccoli. And, on a week-to-week basis, we're eating broccoli 3 to 5 times. So having it in the yard from, essentially November 1st to probably March 1st is a really nice thing to do. And one of the things that I do about that, and there's this thing in farming, and especially, and it's really nice in urban farming, it's called successive ripening. So I'll start in August and I'll plant out some broccolis, and then I'll plant out some broccolis in September, and I'll plant out some broccolis in October, and I'll plant out some broccolis in November. So what I've just done is by November, I'm harvesting broccoli. And when that broccoli is done, in December, I have broccoli that shows up. And in January, I have broccoli that shows up. And in February. So it's a method by which we plant a lot, but we harvest it rather than harvesting, 200 pounds of broccoli in 30 days. I'm harvesting 5 pounds of broccoli a month so that we have something to eat every day.
And that also makes sense because, if you are a person that works a regular job and has a life and, farming is not your one gig, then you are going to have to be able to feed yourself regularly throughout this specific span of time, or sell it or give it to your friends. You don't want to have to go in there and deal with an entire crop and harvesting an entire yard worth of fruits and vegetables. So that absolutely makes sense.
And I get this talking about time. So let's talk about time. I have a third of an acre. A third of an acre is, like I said earlier, 80 by 160 feet, essentially. It's a nice sized piece of property for the city of Phoenix. And from one corner of the property to the other corner of the property, there's stuff growing. There is not a place on this property that I don't have activated with food in some way or supporting food. And so people ask me this all the time. How many hours a week do you put into this place to keep it rolling? And first of all, my alone time, my wonderful time, my connect with nature time is when I leave my desk, which my office is at my house. Mm-hmm. So I get up periodically during the day and I'll go pull some weeds and I'll work in the yard. But so it's my time, that time that I actually do get to spend in the yard is my connection time to we call it, my sweetie Heidi and I call it farm time. And it's where we connect into the yard. But really the bottom line is 2 hours a week for a third of an acre.
What?
Uh-huh.
I probably just blew my mic out.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe on a good week, 3 or 4 hours. And on a really good week, I get to spend 8 or 10 hours a week in the yard.
Wow.
But what I've done is I've used concepts of nature that I pulled from permaculture to handle the systems that are in the yard. So I don't dig anymore in the yard. I haven't dug in my yard for years. Unless I'm taking out Bermuda or nutgrass, which are noxious weeds here, I don't dig. How I plant a bed out is when I'm done harvesting a bed, I pull out all the plants. In fact, often what I'll do is I'll cut the plants off at ground level. So what that does is that leaves the roots in the soil so they rot and put compost right in the soil.
Okay.
Right? And then I'll come in and I'll put 2 inches of fresh compost on the top of the bed and I'll plant.
Wow. I not only have I never thought of doing that, but I've never heard anyone else do that. And I, for a while there, before I was working on my master's thesis, I used to watch what I called farm TV. And I would just watch YouTube for hours and hours and hours. I mean, it was such a time suck, but I loved it. It was really entertaining and I learned a whole ton. And honestly, in that whole time, I've never heard anyone say that.
Because my goal in the yard isn't to create work. My goal in the yard is to create fun and to create food. And if I just look at nature, honor nature, make nature inclusive in my space, let nature do the work, then I don't have to do the work. And then it becomes fun.
Imagine that.
I know, right? Here's simple things. I use a particular kind of seed when I plant. People have heard of probably 3 different kinds of seeds, genetically modified, which, in the whole scope of things right now in 2016, we home farmers really don't have to worry about genetically modified seeds. Now, I really think that people need to go out and educate themselves about genetically modified crops. But right at this moment in 2016, we don't really have to worry about getting seeds. So we don't have to, we can take that off the table for the moment in garden seeds. Hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds are the kind of seeds where they take watermelon A, watermelon B, they cross-pollinate them, they come up with watermelon C, which, oh, by the way, is seedless and really sweet. It's not a bad thing. It's natural selection in nature. That's how that happens.
So you can't take a seed from a quote unquote seedless watermelon and make more. So you're constantly having to cross pollinate and make those particular seeds because they're not going to make their own.
Right. Exactly. Now, some hybrids produce a seed that could be a viable seed. And do I plant hybrids occasionally? Absolutely. I don't have anything against hybrids, except I go with the kind of a seed that will go to seed, replant itself in my landscape so that I don't have to, and then I can harvest. So I'm walking across. I had a friend of mine here yesterday, and we were doing a little bit of work. And I'm walking across the front yard, and I stopped and I said, "James, look at that!" And right in the middle of the lawn was a lettuce plant, and that is because number one, I let volunteers grow in my yard, and number two, I use heirloom and open pollinated seeds. So when they go to seed, I just spread those seeds in the yard. And what happens is I get a lettuce in the lawn. Or I get parsley. I have a forest of parsley growing in my backyard right now that I didn't plant. And parsley is one of those harder things to germinate.
Right.
So that's one of the ways that I plug into nature is that I plant only seeds that will reseed themselves so that, down the road, I can just go out and, harvest, forage. It's like in the forest, if you go out in the forest, does anybody plant seeds? No.
No.
Does anybody rake up leaves? No. Does anybody clean up animal poop? No. These are all things that happen in the forest. And guess what? These are all things that happen in my yard.
And this speaks to the regenerative system that you were talking about before. Regenerative design, which obviously nature does on its own and you've done at your farm.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly. And I learned all about it in my first permaculture design course in 1991 or 92 when I took it.
Excellent. I want to dive into our 7 sustainable questions here, but we are going to take a quick break and be right back. Do you ever hear the suggestions given by our guests and think, yeah, that's great and all, but I don't have the time, the money, or even know where to start? Or maybe you just want someone to go through the journey with you. Well, this is your chance. If you're looking to live a more sustainable lifestyle each and every day, join the Sustainable Lifestyle Challenge. Each day, I will challenge your actions and your mindset to be more eco-conscious. You will have the full support of the Sustainable Lifestyle Challenge community, as well as myself, and we'll be with you every step of the way. Oh, and did I mention it's 100% free? The challenge starts September 12th, so don't miss out on the action. Hop on over to sustainablelifestylechallenge.com and sign up today. See you there. Again, that's sustainablelifestylechallenge.com. All right, so we are back. Greg, you are obviously a man who loves to experiment. So I want to talk to you about some of the long-standing habits that you believe have drastically improved your life. Do you have a couple of those that you can share with us?
Absolutely. One that I have been doing for decades. And this is, I believe, the single most important thing in my health. And that is that I have reduced the need to earn. I live a nice life. I have a house that I bought 27 years ago and I paid, some crazy small amount for it. I've been here 27 years and it's virtually paid off. I have a vehicle that I have. It's a 1985 Toyota pickup truck that I had refurbished last year and it's paid off. And so I've set up my life with a lot of nice conveniences for me, but I don't need to consume a whole lot. There's not a lot that I need because so much of what I do is, I'm happy with who I am and I'm happy with what I do in the world and I don't need a lot. And the truth of the matter is if I do come across something that I need, it's generally not a new Porsche. It's, I need some new t-shirts or I need a new pair. Here's what I need right now. I hike and we have the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, which is the largest in-city mountain preserve in the country or the largest park in the country. It's amazing. And it's 5 minutes from my house. So what I need right now is a new pair of boots. I need a new pair of hiking boots. So sometime in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to go out and spend $150 on a pair of hiking boots. So, and that's the level of needs that I need. And, so many people out there in our culture use shopping therapy to sustain themselves in the world. I'll use your word. And, that's not always the best thing. Not always the best thing. And so, I've become very comfortable and at peace and really in love with my life and what I do in the world. And a big piece of that was that I and I'll go back to the original question. I have reduced my need to earn. So I don't, on a given month, if, I can get by on a couple of grand. And, a buddy of mine, I have two friends actually. One of them is 12,000 a month is what he needs to earn. And another one, I would guess, is double that. Both of them are great friends that I've known for decades. And they're both really successful people, but they have to go out and make that kind of money. And so it kind of puts us in a trap. It puts us in a trap of, oh my gosh, I've got to go out and earn. And I propose to your listeners, what if you designed a life? And it takes time. I'm not saying that it's an overnight thing, but what if you reduced your need to earn? And that's really reducing your spending long term. Right. And I don't do without. I'm not saying do without. I mean, I have a delightful life. Heidi and I, we basically either grow the food in our yard or we eat organic. And it's not cheap in our culture to eat organic.
Yeah, that's true. But if you grow it yourself, imagine how much money you can save.
Exactly. So, number one, reduce your need to earn, because it'll make for a lot more peaceful life long term. Remind me what the question was. I know.
One of your long-standing habits. I mean, you've given several, and I think you have kind of put into a very simplified term or phrase what the kind of life that I want to eventually get to. I live currently in Los Angeles, and I admittedly have educational debt, not traditional educational debt from my degree, because that was lovingly paid for by my grandmother, but I have paid for certifications, and I've paid for a lot of entrepreneurial education, things like that. So, other than my debt and my rent, I really have very few expenses.
Isn't that nice?
It is nice, and it would be even nicer if if I could get rid of one of those, and then I'd only have to work part-time, and that's where I'm trying to get right now.
Let me give you all a hint on that. And I stumbled across one of the people in the world who I think is one of our amazing financial leaders in the world. And when I stumbled across him 2 years ago, I went and did his Financial Peace University, and then I listened to his podcast. It's Dave Ramsey.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm not a deep religious person. I have my own spirituality, as you can imagine, but I don't go to church. He is a Christian, but don't let that get in your way. He is the most incredibly kind and generous and thought-provoking man and person out there in this realm of finances. So one of the ways over the past couple of years that I've gotten really clear and gotten my, some of my debt under control and that kind of stuff is listening to David Ramsey and doing what he says.
Okay. I've heard that from two other people recently, and I think after I get off of a couple other regiments, I'll call them that I'm doing from a couple other people here in the next couple months, I'll definitely delve into his.
Yeah, it's simple. He's got a daily podcast. Just go listen to his podcast.
A daily podcast? He's another one of those. Oh man.
Yeah, he's another one. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, hey, he's got the time, and he's got a wealth of knowledge to share. So that's awesome for him. I want to get back to these questions because I'm so curious. What is one new habit that you're cultivating in your life right now?
Walking away from technology.
Good one. Yeah.
When Heidi and I go out to the grocery store, to dinner, I leave my technology behind in the car. I've been so I got on my first Macintosh computer in 1984. And I decided, being an entrepreneur, so I started my first business when I was 15, and so that was in 1975, so 10 years later. Being an entrepreneur, I took one look at this computer, Macintosh computer back then, and I said, I'm going to make a living on this computer. And so I have been plugged into some kind of technology deeply since 1985. And it has become all consuming. And, my challenge for people is leave your technology behind for a few hours and see how it feels. Can you do it easily? If you can't, then you have a problem.
Well, tell me about it. I mean, when I'm at work, I sit at a computer all day. Another thing I'm trying to get away from, but I use another piece of technology to distract me while I'm sitting at this technology on my computer, which is listening to a lot of podcasts. Some of them are or Pandora, if I'm writing or reading email or something like that. But it is all consuming. It's everywhere, and sometimes you really do just have to step away, go for a walk, like you said, go to the grocery store or dinner without your phone. That's fantastic advice, and I think it's something that we all know, but it's something that so few people do.
Well, it's interesting. I'm 55, and I remember a time when there was no technology. My niece and nephew, who are 14 and 16 or so, all they know is technology.
Yeah, that's true.
So I kind of, not in a pitiful way, but I kind of feel sorry for him. It's like, wow.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I was born in 85, and my father has been working on computers since before I was born. I mean, almost 35 years at this point, and he's still a programmer, and so every time he's done with a piece of technology, he would pass it to me. So I've literally been using a computer since I was like 3-4 years old. So I'm kind of in that same place where a lot of people that are in the millennials are. They've had technology their entire life, but also because I love nature, I love hiking, I love sailing, I do take the opportunity to step away from technology. And when I go camping, oh my God, it's so freeing. It's like, Mom, don't call me. You're not going to be able to get in touch with me for 4 days. And of course, it does not make her very happy. But to me, it's like so rejuvenating or regenerative.
Yeah, there you
go.
Use
that word again.
I love it. All right.
What is one item that you have acquired in the last 6 months that you didn't have to pay for that has greatly impacted your life?
The item that I can speak to, and this won't be surprising to you at all, is sunlight. Here on my urban farm, I grow all kinds of things, and I harvest the sunlight for electricity and for heat for our water. And it's an asset and a resource that comes from nature that you don't have to pay for. And it makes a huge difference for me in my life.
Absolutely. What is one internet resource other than your own site, which we're going to talk about here in a second? What is one resource that you can share with our listeners? Something that has to do with urban farming or environmental change or regenerative or resilient design?
Yeah. So I have a buddy here in town. His name is Jake Mace, and he is the vegan athlete, and he puts up almost daily videos of how he has converted over the past 5 years his yard from a dirt pile into a lush food forest. And go check out his videos. He's Vegan Athlete on YouTube. Jake is absolutely amazing at what he does. He's been on my podcast 3 times now because he has so much to say.
Right.
Yeah.
What is one book other than Ishmael you've mentioned that you would suggest to our listeners that might specifically have to do with cultivating a sustainable or resilient or regenerative mindset?
Almost have to walk to my bookshelf for that. Introduction to Permaculture by Bill Mollison. Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway are 2 really good permaculture books. Yeah, and then Ishmael is, that's the one that changed my life forever.
Awesome. I have one Audible credit that I have to use this month, so that's probably going to be what I use it on. And just so that my listeners know, you can go to asustainablemind.com and actually get a free 30-day trial and 1 free book credit from Audible.
Ooh, nice.
What current projects are you really excited about in the near future?
So 5-6 years ago, I saw this notion of online education, and I honestly was against online education 5-6 years ago. And I started paying attention to it, and I started looking to see how much people were learning from online classes. And so I actually, in 2008, took an online class myself from a guy out of California on how to write a mini book. And within 8 weeks, I knew how to write a mini book, and within 6 months, I had 3 of them published.
Wow! Oh, huh?
Yeah, and it was a really cool process. So it kind of opened my eyes to online education. So, a year and a half ago, in October of 2014, I launched Urban Farm U. And Urban Farm U is a platform where we can really teach you how to start your urban farm, how we can teach you how to grow your own food, and really start plugging into the bounty that is nature that helps you grow food. So that's really what I'm excited about these days is our Urban Farm U courses that we've got coming up. We've got one launching in June called Growing Food the Basics, and that's an amazing course. We stack it with our Jumpstart Your Urban Farm class, and the Jumpstart Your Urban Farm class is basically a introduction to permaculture concepts, so that you can start getting a sense of what permaculture is and how to implement it in your yard. And then Growing Food the Basics is a 7-week online course where we teach you how to grow your own food.
Awesome. And you can go to urbanfarm.org, and one of the tabs at the top is Meet Urban Farm U, and another one is courses. So you can go check out Greg's stuff online. He's got a lot of awesome courses. Some of them I'm looking forward to taking, and probably the Permaculture City. I think that's really interesting. Yes. Creating it for living spaces in an urban environment, which is definitely what I'm interested in.
And that Permaculture City course is taught by Toby Hemingway, who wrote Gaia's Garden and awesome. The Permaculture City. So
very cool.
Yeah.
If you're interested in any of the topics discussed on today's show, whether it's urban farming, permaculture, or regenerative design, check out what Greg's got growing on at his urban farm by visiting urbanfarm.org, or you can catch him on Facebook at The Urban Farm. So finally, Greg, I wanted to ask you, it's been a long journey start to finish. If you only had 12 months to really recreate everything that you've done in the last, 25 years, what would you do differently? What are the fundamentals, the resources, and the connections that you would put in place right away to ensure success for your urban farm?
So a big piece of what I've done over the past 20 years has been trial and error. Experiment here, experiment there. And I've learned a lot over the past 25 years on basically starting a food forest. And I think the single biggest thing, the place that I would start is, if I was starting brand new with a new farm, is I would build out a forest. The first piece of my forest system would be to bring in a large amount of mulch and, cover the entire property with mulch, whether it be, 1,000 square feet in the back or, an entire third of an acre like my friend Jake Mace did. And he's added 8 inches of basically wood chips to his property. And what that does immediately is it starts building a layer of soil between the wood chips and the dirt that over time sets you up for long-term success.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate you coming on the show. You've offered so much, not just, basic knowledge about what to grow and how to grow and some awesome tips that I think gardeners that listen to this show are probably going to go out and implement in their gardens like right now. But overall knowledge about this movement, this grow your own food movement, and also what most people have been calling the sustainability movement. You've offered a ton of things that we need to think about. So it's been a fantastic conversation, and I really value your contribution to this show. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to A Sustainable Mind podcast. To hear more interviews just like this one, please subscribe on iTunes or visit asustainablemind.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.